press that. So in about 3 seconds, you're live.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the QuaranCon World Building in SFF, science fiction, fantasy. As the blurb says, great authors create vivid animated settings for their stories, enticing the reader into another world and make them yearn for places they've never been. They make the incredible credible and highlight the greater possibilities of life. Our expert panel is surrounding me right now. Discusses their inspirations and methods for building out these worlds within worlds. All right. Hi, I'm Matt Presley. I write under MD Presley. I've studied world building for a while now, in fantasy specifically. I literally wrote the book on it, world building for fantasy fans and authors, looking at the theories and strategies going back from Tolkien all the way through Jemison and Sanderson, that type of thing. The idea is to study world building as a concept, since it is so important to the genre, since we are supposed to make the incredible credible, as it said. I'm joined by this incredible panel here. I just guess I should start with Kay, and I'm going to read from her bio from Amazon, because this is the kind of preparedness that we do here. And I just lost it, of course. Let's see where. As a fiction writer, known for deeply personal themes and character-driven narratives, much of her work is inspired by her childhood and the slums of, I'm sorry, could you please pronounce that for me, since I'm going to murder it?
Taguig.
Taguig. The Philippines. I'm sorry, it's not B, is it? She is now living amidst the forest and mountains with her husband, children, and dogs in Armour, BC. But she is really known for the Wolf of Orn Yarrow. Yes, there we are. Right there, part of the Wolf Queen. I thought it was the Bitch Queen for so long. Did it?
Amazon was not being nice.
All right. I swear I've known it for, yeah.
Yeah, we had a bit of trouble getting some promotion going on for it, because Amazon kept.
Well, okay, so I'm not insane. That makes me feel better. I appreciate it. 2 books out now, Wolf and Orn Yarrow. It's Intisar. I don't know. I'm murdering these.
Intisar, yeah.
And the Dragon of Jin. Oh boy. Saying. Ooh, and that one's coming out soon, right?
Yeah, it's on next month.
Next month. Oh wow. Oh yeah, it is then. It's already April. Wow. So thank you and welcome. And I guess we're moving on to, I forgot the alphabetical order. So let's just do first names. Andrea, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Andrea Stewart. I write fantasy and science fiction. I currently have out The Bone Shard Daughter from Orbit Books. So that's out right now. The paperback just came out. The Bone Shard Emperor, the next in the trilogy, is coming out in November. And I am working on the Bone Shard War right now. So it's epic fantasy, and that's me.
Okay, I'm doing alphabetizing, which is never my strong suit. So Evan, I believe you're next.
Hey everyone, my name is Evan Winter. I am the author of The Rage of Dragons, The Fires of Vengeance, and the upcoming The Lord of Demons, if I can get my full act together and finish that book so that it can come out next year. Yeah, so pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, Intisar, I believe you're next.
My name is Intisar. I write, my tagline is I write mighty girls in diverse worlds. And I have an indie series out, which is called the Sunbolt Chronicles. Looks like that. And then my latest release was actually through Harper Teen. It's called The Theft of Sunlight, and I love this cover so much. And I tend to write very character-driven, kind of epic fantasy, kind of high fantasy. I don't really know. But it's always a very female-led and very intentionally diverse world. So I'm really excited to be here talking about world building.
Thank you. And RJ, would you like to go?
Oh, yeah. Hi, I'm RJ Barker. I'm the author of the Wounded Kingdom books, which are Age of Assassins. I've got the first one. I've taken my picture off, so I can't actually see if you can see that. So I'm just going to presume you can. Anyway, and that's followed by Blood of Assassins, and the final one, King of Assassins, and they all came out through Orbit Books. I've got quite a lot of my Orbit buddies here with me. And my latest books are The Bone Ships, which won the British Fantasy Society's Best Novel Award, which I'm never going to shut up about, basically. I'm just got everyone's going to be so sick of me. And the newest one's Call of the Bone Ships. That came out last year, and the next one comes out in September. That will be The Bone Ships Wake, and that's the end of this trilogy, and then it will move on to something else. And I just write a lot. I don't have any. I'm a bit of a tart. I'll write anything, but I like people, and that's what I write about. I write about people, and I like to put them in interesting places, and I like to just make up stuff. And that's basically what I've ended up writing: fantasy or science fiction. Could be anything, really. Just shut up, RJ. Carry on.
Oh, thank you, everyone. So just real quick, for the audience watching at home, there is a chat up on the YouTube. If you have any questions for a Q&A that we will hopefully have time for at the end, please drop them in there, and I will pass them along to our authors who are here. This is great. Okay, so world building is one of the four table legs of the fantasy genre. It's up there with character, plot, and prose. At the same time, it's very seldom examined as a concept. We talk about it a lot, but we don't have a lot of shared a shared vocabulary or shared definitions that we use. At the same time, as Wolf points out in his textbook on world building, worlds can exist without stories, but a story can't exist without a world, which is one of the reasons that makes fantasy and science fiction so special, is that you come back again and again to experience the world that you love so much. As being part of this science fiction and fantasy, like we, as Star Trek so put it, seek out new life and new civilizations. And I'm joined by a bunch of amazing authors who have been building new worlds and new civilizations for everyone to explore. And so taking it back to kind of the beginning of world building, again, stories have been around for forever, but Tolkien had a huge amount of influence on world building for fantasy. He's the one who coined the term primary and secondary worlds that we still use today. And he looked at this even before he did Lord of the Rings, and maybe even before The Hobbit, I can't remember. He did a series of lectures on it. Anyway, so he cast a long shadow over all of us to this day that we're still kind of breaking out of. And I think he would be pretty impressed with how we're doing that. So with that intro into there, let's start about process for our authors right here. Where would you say that world building begins for you in terms of process? Do you start with the world? Do you start with the character? I'm sure they all interact, but who would like to discuss their world and how they started forming it?
I'll start. I've never been. Well, you can't shut me up, really, if we're honest. I'm not a planner in any way. I tend to have a few very rough ideas of things I'd like to do, like the Bone Ships. I knew it was going to be ships because it was called the Bone Ships. And I tend to start with our world and take something out of it and then recreate it around that. But there's no thought behind it. I'm very, very lazy, basically. And I just thought, how could you have big sort of 17th and 18th century warships in a world with no wood? And that was the starting point. And from there came the idea of, dragons, big dragons, and you can use their bones because bones are always used. They have been in some seafaring societies, scrimshaw and stuff like that. So that kind of made sense. And I knew I wanted a matriarchy because I'm interested in power, and it's an easy way of just making people look at it again by not showing them the power that they're instantly used to. And outside of that, really, everything else I discovered while I write it, I just sort of stumble in, and I write in a very close first or third person generally in my books. So I don't really have to know much. I only have to know enough for that character and what they're seeing. And what's mysterious to them is mysterious to the reader. And I'm never really tempted to sort of go off and explain a million things to you, which I think is quite useful because it means I have to do less editing later on. So everything I do is kind of I've a very lazy way of writing, so I have to do as little as possible, preparation wise or at the end.
So I think I'm going to jump to Intisar after this, but so you started with removing wood before bringing in dragons.
Yeah.
It's an interesting take on it, going for the removal of something instead of the epic dragons.
Yeah,
cool.
it's how I started with the Wounded Kingdom books. I can't remember what I removed or something.
I didn't catch that. I'm sorry.
I started the same with the Wounded Kingdom books as well, but I've completely forgotten what I removed.
Intisar, would you like to tell us about your process?
Sure. First I was going to say, RJ, that it doesn't sound like lazy world building to me at all. Like you create problems for yourself that you think very creatively around how to solve, and and then you ask questions of the world we take for granted, like what would it be like to live in a world of matriarchies rather than patriarchies. So I wouldn't undersell yourself. That sounds pretty fabulous. I am also not a planner when it comes to world building. It's really hard for me to create a world from the outside. I have to get into it and start exploring it as a character. And so it's character driven stories for me. Usually a character will just show up, won't let me sleep, will keep talking to me, and I will start writing little bits of scenes trying to understand who they are, and they'll develop over the course, and my relationship with them will develop over the course of these conversational scenes, in which random things are happening to them, and those random things help inform me what the world is like. When I get to the point where I know what my character's arc is, that's when the world starts to become more clear to me, and I'll start asking the questions that you ask, RJ, of like, well, what am I taking for granted? Are there assumptions I'm making that I shouldn't make, right? How is this different? And I think of world building as not just, are there dragons, or what color skin do people have, but also what's the socioeconomic status for my character? How do they relate to power in their hierarchies? How do they relate to class? How all of these things interplay? But I do it from the inside. Like I said, like if I sit down and try and make notes about what a world is like, it's just a dead world to me. Like I can't write it. I have to be in there with the character, kind of having these experiences and figuring out, maybe this is how, no, that doesn't feel right. I'm going to question this assumption and try another thing. And then eventually I build out the world from there. So it's iterative, and it's a little bit time consuming, but it's also really fun, which is probably the only reason why it works for me.
Can I just ask very quickly, are you frightened of becoming bored? That's what my big terror is, that I'll bore myself. So I like the fact that I'm finding out all the way along.
I mean, yeah, that's why those stories die, is they're boring. The ones that I try to plan. They're just boring. I don't want to write this. I don't know anyone wants to read this. Everything's already known. Like, so yeah, it's definitely. But I think it's how our minds work, right? So I have friends who, and I'm really interested to hear from the rest of you if you do plan your worlds, because I have friends who couldn't imagine writing the way I do, because it is kind of very consuming and inefficient. But it's the only thing that works for me. So.
Real quick, I'm actually leading a workshop after this about how top down and bottom up, planner or plotter, how we use both of them most of the time. But if you had to pick, pick one, everyone here, who would say they're a plotter? If you could raise your hand. Okay, and the rest of you. Oh,
halfway.
Halfway. I was going to say that there's going to be someone who says like, I use both. Yeah, but and RJ and Intisar both, as you said, you experience it from the character's perspective and are discovering it along with them.
I do, but at the same time, I have to know certain things before I start, so I'm kind of in between. Like I have to know my characters' arcs. I have to know the climax of
Yeah.
the story before I can start actually writing. So I'm kind of in between the plotter and the pantser.
Can we hear from one of the plotters of their process?
I'll go ahead. So I start fairly similarly in that I usually I'll have a document where I'm kind of just jotting down ideas that I'm really interested in exploring. And then I kind of look to see how can I combine those ideas? How can I make those ideas interact? And sometimes I'll lose some things on the way. But for instance, with the Bone Shard Daughter, I was thinking that I wanted to have some form of magic using these bone shards. And I also wanted to have constructs in the book. So I thought, well, how can I combine these? Well, I'll have the bone shards have the commands for these constructs and also be powering them. So I do kind of a little bit like that. And then once I kind of get a feel for what it's going to be like, I'll start jotting down a little bit more world details, like what is the economy like? What are their mythologies? Like what stories do they tell each other? What games do they play? Like things like that all have a document, a world building document that kind of just has a little bit of what the world is like. So I kind of plan it out that way. And then I do more planning as I start to write. So once I start to get a feel for it, and I think that, okay, I know what this world is like, I'll write a few chapters, and then inevitably I don't know exactly what it's like. And then I'll go back and do a little bit more planning. So that's kind of how my process works.
So you kind of have a similar iterative thing, except that you're more planning up front, but you still have to test things out.
And I just wanted to ask, the moving islands, so did you start with the magic system and then add the moving islands, or are they, I don't spoiler it.
Yeah, I mean, the moving islands make sense in a larger world sense, once you find out everything that's going on. So
I figured that was the answer. Okay.
Yeah.
Either Evan or Kay, do you want to? I'm sorry, did I interrupt, or were you done?
Oh, I'm done.
Okay, sorry. Either of you like to speak up about your process? No.
Okay, I guess I'll hop in real quick and then I'll pass the ball to Kay. Yeah, I'm definitely a heavy plotter, and the way that I tend to do it, I think, is that I like to. Storytelling for me is about asking questions and then trying to discover the answer, or not even the answer, but trying to learn more about the question or what I think about the question through the telling of the story. So oftentimes I don't think I'm ever going to get to the answer, but I'm just trying to learn more about the human condition from my perspective by telling that story. So when I figure out what the question is that I have to ask or what I'm curious about, the world kind of builds out of that, because in order to come closest as I can to understanding the question better and approaching an answer, then the world sort of molds itself to be the kind of world, the kind of crucible that allows that question for me to travel down the path of understanding that question better. So I think that for me, it starts with a question, and then the world builds out of that and molds itself to best be the type of place where that question gets asked, and that question kind of comes close to coming to an answer.
Okay, would you like to interject? I don't know if it's the right term. As a writer, you should probably know what interject means.
Oh, I was just going to add one thing, that two things actually. Firstly, Evan is the most terrifyingly organized person I've ever met. It genuinely scares me. I love him. It's just all the things I'd like to be inside, but then, and I'm just I read some of the stuff he just. How do you do that, Evan? It's amazing. But the plotter and pantser thing it changes a bit when you get onto your second trilogy, because you have to supply your book, really. You have to tell them what you're going to do with your book. So even though I'm a totally discovery writer, I've still, when I sent in the bone ships, I had to send to Orbit a synopsis of the book I was going to write and the entire trilogy. So you're forced into a degree of planning that you can then ignore. I mean, I submitted a 6-page prose poem to my editor, and she just said, "You're mad, but I love it." and don't do that if you're thinking of submitting something to your editor. It's generally a bad idea. But so it kind of, once you get to past your first books, you don't really have that option the same way. It's a bit of a cheat. But anyway, Kay, it's your turn. Sorry, I'll shut.
My process is kind of similar to Evan's, where there's either a question or an issue or a theme that I kind of want to explore. So a lot of the worlds I've done, it's very Filipino centric. So the world in The Wolf of Oreñaro, it's something I've been working on for 16 years, counting. So this world in particular has different areas and different events happening that are all like related, and the way the world has evolved in these last 2 decades is just because I've written other series in that same world, and they're in different parts of the world. So but it's not something I actually plan. It's something that as I write, I kind of discover it. But then once I've discovered it, it becomes set in stone. It becomes canon. And then in picking up later from it, then I also I kind of take whatever I learned from the previous one and then put it here and then examine it again. So it's like this constantly evolving process. Now that's not the only world I've done. I've done other worlds, and the other worlds are somewhat smaller, but I've approached them in the same way, where there's something that I want to explore, and then I kind of adjust the world so that it brings out that theme to its fullness. So like, say I wanted to, this is something I'm working on, but I wanted to talk about like humans also kind of being monsters. So the world has to have a lot of monsters. And then you just kind of form everything to make that theme really like come to life. And it's like the design is built into that, and the world building is part of that.
Oh, sorry. Oh, Intisar, would you like to say something?
I find that so fascinating. And it's funny because I feel like I do that backwards. I'll tell my story and I'll be like, wow, like when you said the humans versus monsters, I mean, 100% I have a story like that. And I got about halfway through it and I was like, oh, these humans are monsters. Like, let's get some monsters in here. And so, then rejigging the beginning of the story to like start introducing the fact that there's so many different kinds of peoples and so, or types of sentient creatures here, and many of them are monstrous, but who's the worst of them all? Hello. But it's just fascinating to like, for me as a discovery writer, I draft the book and I'll literally go to early readers and be like, hey, what are the themes here? Because I won't know what my subconscious is pulling out. Like I think I know what the story's about, but the fact of the matter is, the story is also bringing things out that I'm not aware of. And once I have that, then I go back through and I do massive revision, and that's where the monsters come in and other things come in to help build these themes. So it's very like, it's a backward approach. I love that you're able to do that from the front.
It's iterative as well for me, because sometimes it's just like a single page on a notebook, and then I go and I start drafting, and then something else comes out, and then maybe I get stuck 2 chapters in, and then I go back and then I re-outline and then I redraft, and it's extremely chaotic. I don't think I've like, every book I've written is very different. There's some where I outline it straight and everything works out, and then somewhere like I outline it and then my book laughs at me. It's so bad that I'm like, why did I even bother to outline this?
I wrote no less than 6 final chapters to my novella Sunbolt, and each of them was like, I wrote it to, or sorry, it was the first introductory chapter, And I would like write a little like 1 paragraph summary of, oh, this sounds great. This is what's going to happen. And like the book just hated me. Like they were terrible chapters. Yeah. So yeah, I hear that very much. Like you have to keep trying till you find it.
I love the thing that Intisar said about sending it off to your readers to find out what you're actually writing about. I think we might be siblings on some levels. Sometimes I'll read a review and it'll say in the review, and the author was clearly talking about this, and I'll go, oh yeah, I was. Yeah, thanks for that. I don't noticed.
That's the truth.
Yeah.
I've read those reviews too.
Yeah, well done.
For the plotters here, do you guys employ a Bible or a series Bible or anything like that?
Yeah, I started my own like little wiki page because I realized when I was writing book 2 that I didn't remember a lot of the stuff, and then having to go back through and like kind of word search in my old manuscript to try to remember like, where did I say something about this, or where did I put this person's name was agonizing. So actually having it all in one spot that's easily navigated, I found extremely helpful.
And do you mind, is it a company like a free wiki, or is it what would
It's SlimWiki, so I use that one to put it together.
I'm so jealous of anyone that can do that, because I just can't. I'm just useless. The assassin books, I said this before when we were doing the magic panel, there's a fighting system where every move is numbered and named, and I didn't write any of it down because I didn't think anyone would buy this book. I thought it'd just be another book that I wrote and no one bought, and I was wrong. So they got to the second one and I had to go back and remember it all. And then the bone ships is ships, and I decided to invent them and all the language from the ground up, and my advice is don't, because they're really complicated and it's horrible, and you come back to it a book later and you're just like, oh, what have I done? I've just given myself the biggest headache. So some organization is probably good, maybe.
Yeah, I work out of Scrivener, and I sort of keep everything in Scrivener, and I do take sort of world notes, and I have a world Bible that says how far this is from this place, and how many sort of scars this person has and where they are and how tall so-and-so is. The problem that I run into is as I'm writing, whenever sort of a new detail comes up, I should in theory sort of just quickly note that, but then you're in the flow of writing, and so you can't really stop and do it. No. So I miss tons of things, and that means I still have to reread and sort of refresh my memory about the first time someone mentions X, Y, or Z. But I do try to have sort of a world Bible so that everything feels consistent and stays sort of where it should.
But that's why we love copy editors as well, because you just throw the book at them and then they come back and go, you got all this wrong, this person doesn't look like that at all. They don't wear a hat, you fool. Oh, yeah, sorry. My poor copy editors, I should send them a lot of money, really, because they save me, because they're stupid.
Personally figured, somebody who keeps the Bible, I found one of the most important things was in when I mentioned new character, write down their hair color and eye color, because you will want that later. And that was probably the most useful thing I think I learned from my Bible upkeep. Evan?
Yeah, I just want to jump back on both of those points and say that one of the most remarkable things, again, I only have 2 published books currently, working on my 3rd. One of the most remarkable things in being traditionally published and having that sort of copy editor from Orbit work with me was they came back after book 1 and I was writing book 2, and they're like, and so here's your Bible. And they literally had like a whole Bible with a glossary of terms and all this other stuff in it. Yeah, and they're saying so-and-so is this tall, this has a capitalization. And it was to the point where I was almost a little embarrassed. I was like, yeah, I get that is right. You are actually the authority on this, and I'm gonna have to follow the things that you wrote for me. Because yeah, they were very, very sort of precise and detailed in building out that world. And because I'd only written 1 book at the time, I did keep notes, but not in that same kind of organized way that the copy editor came back with a style guide and a world guide for me.
I think Martin actually employs 2 people to maintain all that information for him, and I forgot the website and their names, but they actually got an author credit with his world building book. And yeah, they did it at first as just fun, and then he's like, well, I should probably pay them for keeping up all of this.
I think I need their name.
Or not hiring her. So real quick, let's look at how as we're bringing in fantasy worlds to audiences that are unfamiliar with them. Orson Scott Card refers to abeyance, where audiences will like hold off on like, well, that's a new term or a new idea. I'm not going to judge it yet, but but they will expect an answer at some point in time. How do you bring in new details for your world, the new strange things? Like how soon is too soon to bring in a new word? How early do you introduce a new concept? And go.
I went first last time. Should I do it again?
I'm sorry, I was just reading Bone Ships, and you have new words on the first page. Like
yeah. Suck it up, readers.
This is what you're here for, right?
Yeah. Well, it's really weird because the books before they were very easy to understand. I think they were quite familiar. The Wounded Kingdom books, quite a familiar fantasy world. You could walk straight into those. But the Bone Ships is written from my love of sort of 17th century books about sailing. And if you read something like Patrick O'Brien, you don't understand the first 3 chapters. I have no idea what he's talking about for the first 3 chapters of HMS Surprise when I read it. It's 17th century speech and sailing terms. And then you have this glorious moment about sort of 5 or 6 chapters where somebody says about this thing and you think, oh yeah, that's somewhere near the front. And I love that. I love that feeling of, I'm in this world now. It's enveloping me. And I really wanted to create that with the Bone Ships. So it was very much I'm going to throw the reader into the absolute deep end with this, not explaining anything. You will have to pick it up as you go along. And I did almost chicken out, but my editor wouldn't let me, which is why editors are brilliant. I just went, I've made a terrible mistake. I was going to read this. And she went, no, it's worth it. The people stick with it. And she was right, because she's really good at her job. But yeah, that was a really definite decision. I don't like to explain things anyway, because life doesn't explain things. If a book starts explaining things to me, I tend to walk out of it at that point. I kind of want to absorb it rather than be told stuff, if that makes sense.
Would you say that by not intentionally confusing, but intentionally not caring about the audience's opinion, that you establish more of an authority on the world, that you like, I know what I'm talking about, so shut up and listen?
No, I would say that I'm basically quite selfish and only interested in reading what I want to write. I'm only writing for me. I'm only ever writing for me. I'm writing to enjoy the process of writing, and I'm writing stuff that I want to read. I never think about the reader. I know we're meant to, but I don't. I want to create something. If I'm not creating something that's interesting to me, like Intisar said, I won't finish it. So that is always my primary reasoning, which is probably bad, but it works for me.
Intisar?
Yeah, I actually wanted to kind of build off of something you said, RJ, where that I've gotten feedback sometimes from readers where they're like, well, I just didn't understand what was happening in this world or how it works. And by and large, I find that those are white readers who are suddenly in a brown world. And I have no patience. Sorry. I am a minority. I'm a person of color. I'm a Muslim. I have learned to navigate this world of yours, this white world that I've lived in since I was like 0 days old. So for me, I'm building a diverse world. I'm building diverse cultures. And if you don't know where you stand when you walk into my book, take a deep breath and keep walking. You will figure it out. So I don't pander to the kind of, but I need to understand how these things relate. You'll figure it out. Just because it's not your standard medieval European fantasy does not mean that I have to break it down for you the way you didn't break down standard European medieval fantasy for me. I had to learn to walk through those books. Yeah, you did too, actually, to be perfectly honest. So you can do the mental work to walk through my books. So yeah, I mean, if I need to introduce a new word or a new thing or a new cultural thing, I absolutely do it in the opening passages. I trust my reader to be intelligent, and I trust them to put in the effort to be in a new world. If they're not willing to put in the base effort to be in a new world, then they don't need to be there. So that's a little bit harsh, but that's my take on it. I'm really curious what other folks have to say.
I think you come at fantasy with the hope that people are reading things like fantasy and science fiction because they want something new, and it is our job to give them that. And then there's a degree of people who want something they know, and that is fine. It's comfortable and it's what you love, and that's great. But it's not fulfilling for me as a writer, and I think that's true of a lot of us.
I think it is interesting that I don't think we have any medieval Europe people on the panel right now. I mean, and so that is cool. Like, as I said, we're kind of stepping out of Tolkien's shadow, where elves, dwarves, and dragons is the bog standard.
That was the diversity.
So I mean, so this is a neat time to be a part of the fantasy community of taking from other cultures and other histories. And I wonder if anyone wants to speak about that, but drawing from non-European or non-medieval Europeans is we've spoken to, like, there's difficult with the audience realizing that, but how do you orient them to a new world that is not within their tropey understanding? Anyone, like, how did you approach that specifically? Do you, like, this is not European at the beginning? Do you do you owe them that? And sorry, that does not seem to,
I mean, your world building, right there. When you open the first page of your book, you're in another world, and you're going to create that setting. There's the smells, the sights, the texture of the world. It needs to be there from page one. At least, I mean, unless you're starting with, like, I mean, even if you're starting in a battle scene, if you're starting something that's high action oriented, you can still cue the realities of your world through that. And so I am going to go back to, like, trusting the reader to find those cues, to understand that they're in a slightly different world, and to be willing to walk that path, so to speak. I don't know. Sorry, I should get off my soapbox and let other people talk.
No, I mean, I firmly agree with that, because my personal belief is that as human beings, we are all far more alike than we are different, like far more alike than we are different. And so, yes, there are differences, but it is about being intellectually curious enough to try to understand the differences, because they all come from original points of similarity. So how did we get to those differences in the first place? And that should be a question that I would hope interests most people in general, and I would hope interests readers that come to the books. And the assumption that the problem comes in when people start to make assumptions about something being normal or typical or the default, right? And because a lot of Western culture tends to be the culture that's exported around the world, Western values, Western thoughts, Western storytelling styles become that idea of that default, and that default turns into this is normal, and it's not. I mean, last night I was watching Thelma, which is I believe it's from Finland. It's a movie, right? And so it's Western European, but the way that the daughter, the primary character in that film, was interacting and relating to their parents. Now, there's some reasons for this, but when I'm watching the story, the way that she was relating to her parents, I couldn't tell if I was supposed to be picking up on the fact that these are odd behaviors due to sort of the story circumstances, or if this was normal behavior because this is how Finnish children relate to Finnish parents. Like, I couldn't tell. And I've been noticing that with movies that I've been watching that tend to be foreign language. The German TV series Dark, which is brilliant sort of time sort of traveling weirdness sort of series. I think it's on Netflix right now still. Brilliant film. But a lot of the time I'm watching this film, and it's German, it's Western European, but I grew up in the West, in Western culture primarily, but I'm watching and I'm going, I don't know if I'm supposed to think this is odd, the way that this is seen as playing out, or if I'm supposed to be like, this is normal. And you know what I do? I just roll with it until I figure it out, because you should be curious about other human beings. And again, the clues will be there, the answers will come, because we're all human beings, and the differences are not so great as the similarities.
That is such a good and important thing, that we are all essentially, even when you're doing like aliens or strange creatures, there are those experiences that we can put together, like we love our family and we want to be liked, and those things are absolutely universal. And I always think, sorry, I'm going to stop butting in after this, but I always think the core of every story is not worlds or any of those things, it's people, and that is what matters. And readers latch onto people and will stick with all the rest for those people.
Sorry, Kay, did you want?
Yeah, when I write, I trust my reader quite a bit. I trust them that they can, like, when I drop a clue, that they will pick up on it. It's not like, I don't think I'm that subtle. The problem is that I've had readers who are so impatient that, like, as Intisar was saying, that they want to orient themselves immediately because they can tell that this world is not what they're used to, and they immediately are like, they're being impatient when we've had to learn their worlds, like the medieval, like the Tolkien stories. Those were all new to me when I picked them up. I didn't understand what the concept of elves and dwarves were. I had to orient myself to understand that, oh, elves are like the myths in our country, which was the Encanto. And I had to orient my own head. So when I write, I trust that the reader is capable of making those same connections, especially when I write really, really structured stories where, like, everything is given to you when you need it. But you still have a lot of readers who are being very impatient or not reading your books in order. And it's very difficult when you have a very, very complex world. And I don't know how I'm supposed to, like, hold a reader's hand and explain everything about, like, history and colonization, like all the stuff that they should actually really know about being a human being living in this world. It's just that there are certain readers who have, like, I guess their experience is so limited that when you're asking them even just like a bit more than what they're used to, they have a difficult reaction to it. And I don't know how I can reconcile that. The way I write is that I just focus on my craft. I focus on what's in front of me. So no, I don't I don't do like the first page where I throw in like 100 new terms at once. I do make it easy for the reader, not just like, I don't think of an audience, a default audience. Like, the first person who usually reads my books is my husband. And he's so it's not like there are terms that, he's Filipino, I'm Filipino. It's not like there are terms that he immediately knows, oh yeah, I know what that means. No, he's also like, okay, you're gonna explain what this is later on. So I make it easy, and then like I focus on the craft, I focus on the tension, so that the pages are flowing, so that the story is what the reader is catching on. The characters is what they're the experience of the characters is what they see. It's a human thing, and it shouldn't be about like, this is too foreign for me. It really should, especially in fantasy. But
is there sorry, did anyone else want to respond to that, or should we that's fine.
Yeah, sure, I'll respond. I mean, I definitely agree that I kind of just drop readers in from the first page. There's not like an orientation session or a tutorial. But at the same time, like I do try to balance with making it accessible. So I want people to get the right information at the right times. And for me, it's I do a lot of it through a very close point of view. So the character who is the reader is seeing the story through will have things like they'll relate what's going on to world building stuff, like metaphors and things like that. I think are an easy way to kind of show that, hey, this is not the world that you're used to. And yeah, I feel like there is a way to kind of balance that. I think that you're always going to run into people that are going to be impatient or going to say like, nah, couldn't deal. But I think the vast majority of readers are patient enough to delve into a non-European world. I mean, at least I hope.
I think think a lot of it comes down to trust, right? Like our trusting the reader and the reader trusting us, you know. We have to know our craft well enough to deliver this world and without info dumping, giving them what they need to know as they need to know it. And they kind of have to trust that it's all going to come together and make sense as they go along. And if either one of us fails that, the book's not going to work for that particular reader, right? But as authors, we can only do our side of it, right? And I think that's the key thing for me was like, you know what? No, I'm not going to info dump for the like 2% of readers who need to know everything up front, right? Like Kay said, I'm gonna do this in the best of my craft. I'm gonna give you what you need to know as we go along. I'm gonna keep expanding the world as you get to know it. Because I also write very close. I write first person point of view. So you know, my character's not gonna stop and be like, well, I wonder how magic works. Let me have a conversation with my best friend about this. Like, no, either they know or they don't, and they're not gonna have like thoughtful interior monologue about it on page 2, you know. So we, you know, readers know that when they're reading worlds they're familiar with. They always complaining about info dumps. I know that that's not something for me to be doing in this new world, just to humor the readers who aren't used to stepping into new worlds. So I think it just comes down to, like, for us, like honing our craft, making sure we are giving the readers what they need, but in the time that they need it, without that dumping, and trusting readers to go the distance for us.
It's, oh, sorry. Just real quick, I come from a film background, and the producers hate trusting the readers. That is just, they both like, no, we have to explain this. We have to explain this immediately. Like, if I can't understand it 100%, then there's no way they're going to. And it's, as a screenwriter, it is the most infuriating thing of not being able to trust your writer, your audience at all. So it's really cool that that is where you're coming from in this. And Evan, I'm sorry I interrupted.
No worries. I was just going to say that the other thing is, in my opinion, one of the issues that we currently face in publishing is that publishing feels as if the readers that they worry about and who might stumble over these things are not the actual majority of readers out there. They're not, you don't even need readers that are not interested in experiencing that new world or sort of trusting the author to be able to sell successfully. And as a quick example of that, in almost any genre or subgenre, there are enough readers to make almost any book a massive success. In the indie world, most recently, an author named Will White, who I read, who's written the Cradle series, he writes a subgenre of subgenre. He writes like progression fantasy, which is kind of like a subgenre of epic fantasy. And he went to #1 with his latest release, which is book 8 or 9 in the current series. He went to #1 in the entire US Amazon Kindle store for like 2 days in a row, and then was #2 on the 3rd and 4th day, and then #3 on like the 5th day. And the point of me bringing up this story, the point of me bringing up this story is that this is somebody in a subgenre of a subgenre in the indie space, managing to capture that many readers to make that book instantly in the first couple of days a massive roaring success. So you don't, the idea that the story has to be massively broad and catering to everybody and it can't be challenging or difficult in order to be a success is not true. It's just not. It just means that you have to do a little bit more work to find the right readers who will properly appreciate the story that's being told.
100%.
Oh, so, not to jump to a completely different subject, but we got 10 minutes, and I think people will be upset if we don't discuss this because, you know, it's magic. But, you know, so a soft or a hard magic, someone asked about that in the chat section. I think, I don't know, if you're a hard magic user in your books, can you raise your hand? Okay. Andrea, you have a language set out. Is it 100% like figured out? Do you know what all those words mean, or do you come up with it when you need it for the?
Oh no, I come up with it when I need it, and then I add it to my wiki. So that's how I handle that. Yeah.
Everyone else here is pretty much on the soft spectrum. Or Evan, did I see you begin to raise your hand? Or
yeah, I think I would fall more to the hard section. I have rules for how every single thing works, and then it's about, so I understand how things work, how they came to be, why they are, but it's not like a one-to-one in terms of like physics or something where like Mistborn being by Brandon Sanderson being one of those where, you know, he has all that sort of ingesting of specific metals. They do certain things, and so if you push a certain amount of weight against something, you can push your character a certain amount of distance beyond that. If I'm explaining that right, I don't know. But the point being that it seems very hard to me. That's a hard magic system, and so I'm not that far down the path. But I definitely have a strong set of rules and ideas about what's possible, and more specifically, what is not possible with the magic in the world.
Okay, please.
So my characters believe that there's a hard magic system in the world, but it's soft to me. So basically, they'll come up with their own rules, and I like to lean on the human, like the way we as people, we don't know everything. Even with science, we have the calculations, and then you go and do the experiment, and you're like, why didn't that work? Because there were like other factors in play that you didn't take into account. So that's how my magics work, where they think it's hard based on what they talk about. Maybe there's an expert, like there's a mage there who's like, oh, this is how it should be. But I lean into that mage does not know how the world actually works. That's just their opinion. They're just being a smartass. But, you know, to me, it's soft because then I adjust it. So maybe that mage is really arrogant, and it turns out that they were wrong, and whatever they tried to do was completely wrong. And then there's another mage who's like, this is actually what you should have done. And then like it just creates the maximum drama. I'm more concerned with the drama, like even if it was science, like the drama around the scientific community, whatever, like the politics, the personal relationships. That's what I like focusing on. So the characters believe it's hard. I as the ultimate god of this world, I'm like, no.
That's interesting because I thought that a lot of authors would have a hard system that they just don't reveal to the audience, which is what makes it soft. You know, as long as the audience or the author knows what's going on with it, you know, then it's, you know, secretly hard. But apparently it's secretly soft.
Actually, very, very similar in both of my worlds, where, and I think part of it is as you said, Kay, this knowledge is not a final thing, right? Like it keeps growing and changing, and you know, so my mages in one land think they know exactly how magic works, and then a mage from another land comes along and like does something, and they're like, that shouldn't be possible. You know, because your knowledge development was separate and siloed from theirs, and you're both going to surprise each other and learn and develop. So I mean, I have some general rules of how magic works. I think it's really important in any world building that you have a cost or price for magic. Like, it's a really thing to say, but I'm just going to put it out there. Like, if you have the Harry Potter method where you just wave a wand and say some gibberish and all the things happen, like what is stopping anyone and everyone from being Voldemort? Like nothing. So there has to be a cost to magic or price for what's done, and there have to be ramifications. But beyond that, like my systems tend to like iteratively grow because I keep revisiting them and being like, ooh, I'm going to shift this, and I'm going to shift our understanding of that, and this whole new thing is going to show up, and how does it fit in? And so, yeah, it's definitely not hard.
Mine's completely soft because I think about magic for me is I think it should be mysterious. That's what interests me. I want it to be weird. In the Wounded Kingdom books, there's a massive price for it. It's an ecological metaphor. If you use magic in that world, you suck the life out of the land to do it. So they're kind of on the edge of an ecological apocalypse. And if you do magic, they will kill you because they don't want their world to be any more apocalypsed. So the magician in those books is not a very popular figure with anyone, including himself. And then in the Bone Ships, because I'm not actually that interested in working out magic systems and stuff like that, I outsourced it to an avian slave race. So the answer to the question, how does magic work in that world, is you get them to do it or you threaten to kill them if they don't. So I could kind of look at slavery and how we use people and things like that to it. So yeah, completely. So in fact, I will sidestep it at every given opportunity. So yeah, magic. But there does have to be a cost. There has to be a break on it. Like even the avian slave race, if you push them too hard, they die. So, and they need them for their ships. So they kind of do that. And then you kind of discover spoilery things later on because
I haven't finished yet. Just tell me.
yeah, I'm not going to tell you anymore. But yeah, but you don't get explanations or anything from. Sometimes you'll see people going, "Oh, I'm looking forward to him explaining how this works," and just think, "Oh no, it's not coming. Sorry."
So real quick, unless there is something, we have 5 minutes left, and some people have asked for advice in the chat. And so if you have, I know this is probably now on. If you have one bit of advice to give someone for world building, totally on the spot because we didn't plan this one, but just one tip if anyone would like to go about that. I don't quite belong on this panel, but mine would be write down the hair color and that kind of thing. Keep the notes of the specifics that you're going to want. You won't know that you want those specifics until too late, but get those, because looking through your book for that one mention of something that you might kind of remember is pain in the ass. Does anyone else like to give some advice on world building?
My advice on world building is the same as my advice on writing in general, which is find something you enjoy and just keep doing it again and again till you're really good at it.
Cool. Okay.
My advice is to make sure that your characters live in the world. Don't
that's good.
Mix and match like, oh, I'm gonna make this. Like I'm gonna pick this from this country and then add like this. No, your characters have to live in the world, which means inhabit like all the problems that you introduce into the world. They have to like live and breathe in that world, and don't just like randomly like Frankenstein them together and then hope they just say that that's how it is, because it like, especially when you start borrowing from others, it may, you may end up introducing stereotypes that it's just not good. So yes, please make sure that they inhabit this world.
Anyone else?
Go ahead, Andrea.
Oh, I was just going to say, if you have like one big thing that you are changing or making different about your world, make sure to consider all the ramifications of that so that it does feel like an actual world and that it affects the people who live in it.
I kind of building off of that, I think it's really important when you're creating these new worlds in speculative fiction that you do question your assumptions, question things like, how does power work and who holds power and what are gender norms and why, and then like Kay and Andrea said, let your characters live that, figure out what the ramifications are and make it real. But there's no reason creating a new world that you have to have racism against the same groups as we have. You have to have sexism, or you have to, like, it's okay to have those things and engage with them and deal with them, but it's also okay to create worlds where, like, hey, isn't this amazing, a world without racism? Like, it's okay to do that. So thinking about like just playing with assumptions of how things work, or why things work the way they are, and it's going to bring out different elements of your stories, right? So maybe it isn't racism that's a big issue, it's classism, or maybe whatever it is, but don't just necessarily default to a copycat world of this one with dragons.
I think slightly more useful than what I said at the beginning was your world's internal logic should feed on itself. So it's always answering itself. Like in the bone ships, it's a matriarchy, and the people in charge of the ships, they're the ship wives, and wives are in charge. And that is the logic of that world, because women are in charge. And if your world keeps feeding on itself like that, it's like a ball rolling. It becomes more and more real and more solid, even if you've not actually done any work to start off with, which of course I did loads, honest. But that's how to do it. That they like Kay said, they live there.
I guess I'll say my somewhat amoral standpoint on all of this is that because of my belief that there are large enough readerships out there to support almost any story and book, if you can find that readership, if you can go to where they live, so to speak, lean into what you like. And this is kind of what RG was saying at the beginning. Lean into the thing that would make you want to read the book and that you would love and that you would enjoy. And if you go all the way to the point where you love what you have written, where it excites you and you enjoy it, if you can find the readership, they will do the same. Now, the problem with that is if the things that you love and enjoy are kind of awful, you will meet and find awful people who will love your stuff. And they will support you and they will carry you, and you can make a career with a whole bunch of awful folks, and it'll be fine, I guess. But hopefully you are not awful and you lean into being a wonderful person who wants to make the world and everybody in it a little bit better at the end. And then you'll find those people too. But lean into the thing that you love, because trust that there are readers out there who are looking for just that.
Yeah.
That's a great way to end it right there. Thank you, all of the panelists, for coming out. Villoso, I just practiced that one and I'm still terrified I'm going to mess it up. Sorry, I'm totally blanking on everyone's books because now I'm sitting on the spot. Though I have all of the books and have read all the books and they're amazing. If you could, hold up your book as RJ is doing right now, just to remind everyone to go discover these amazing new worlds and uncover them and see them for the amazing things that they are. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for CornCon.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful time.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
And I'm just ending the stream now.
Oh, sweet. Okay, because it's like, I have no idea how to turn this off.
No, and you don't have to. That's my job.